The crowd's murmurs rose like a dust storm as Prudence Vallens stood trembling on the auction block, her hopes of marriage crumbling beneath the scorching Texas sun of 1875. Only hours ago, she'd stepped off the train in Redemption Creek, letter clutched in her hand, expecting to meet the man who'd promised to make her his wife. Instead, she found herself being sold to the highest bidder like cattle after he'd taken one look at her scarred cheek and declared her damaged goods. $2 for the homely one, shouted a red-faced man from the back, his laughter joining the cruel chorus that had become the soundtrack to Prudence's humiliation. The auctioneer, a portly man with tobacco-stained teeth, grimaced. "Come now, gentlemen. Surely a woman's worth more than that, even one with imperfections." Prudence stared at her worn boots, refusing to let these strangers see her tears. At 23, she'd left everything behind in Boston, her position as a seamstress, the tiny room above Mrs. Finch's bakery, and the pitying glances that followed her down every street since the fire that had claimed her parents and marked her face 4 years ago. $5, called another voice, followed by crude suggestions about what services she might provide. Sheriff Tanner, who'd reluctantly arranged this impromptu auction after her intended husband rejected her, shifted uncomfortably beside the platform. "Show some respect," he warned, hand resting on his holster. $10, offered an elderly man, his eyes kind but his intentions clear as he added, "My wife's been gone 3 years, and I need someone to keep house." The auctioneer nodded encouragingly. $10 for the mail-order bride. Do I hear 15? Prudence's shoulders sagged. This wasn't the life she'd imagined when she'd answered that advertisement in the Boston Chronicle. Respectable rancher seeks God-fearing woman of good character to share in building a prosperous future in the Texas frontier. Theodore Blackwell had seemed perfect in his letters, educated, established, and apparently understanding when she'd mentioned her scar. The reality had been brutally different. A cloud of dust appeared at the end of the main street, and a few heads turned as a horse's thundering hooves grew louder. The sheriff squinted against the sun. $20, shouted someone, drawing Prudence back to her immediate nightmare. 25, countered another. The horse and rider skidded to a halt at the edge of the crowd, sending dirt spraying. Townsfolk parted as a tall man dismounted in one fluid motion. His face was shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat, but there was no mistaking the confident stride as he approached the auction block. "What's happening here?" His voice carried across the suddenly quiet gathering. Sheriff Tanner stepped forward. "Mail-order bride situation gone sour, Hunter. Blackwell refused her on account of her." He gestured vaguely toward Prudence's face. The stranger Hunter looked up, and Prudence found herself staring into the most intense blue eyes she'd ever seen. He studied her for a long moment, then turned to the auctioneer. "This isn't right," he said simply. The auctioneer shrugged. "She's got no money for a return ticket, no family to speak of. What would you suggest?" Hunter Quinn removed his hat, revealing dark hair damp with sweat from his ride. He was younger than Prudence expected, perhaps 28, with a strong jaw shadowed by stubble and a small scar cutting through his right eyebrow. "I'll take her," he said, his voice quieter now but no less firm. A disappointed murmur rippled through the crowd. "As what, Quinn?" called someone. "Your housekeeper or your whore?" In 2 strides, Hunter was face to face with the speaker, a burly saloon worker. "You'll apologize to the lady," he said evenly. The man sneered but fell silent under Hunter's unflinching gaze. Hunter returned to the auction block, addressing the sheriff. "I'll pay whatever's needed to end this spectacle. The lady deserves her dignity." Prudence finally found her voice. "I'm not for sale, sir, not to you or anyone. A hint of a smile touched Hunter's lips. "I'm not buying you, miss. I'm offering you a job. My ranch needs a housekeeper, and you need a place to stay until you decide what's next." He reached into his pocket and pulled out $50. "This should cover any expenses and leave you with choices." The sheriff intervened. "Quinn's good people, Miss Vallens, own the Double Q Ranch about 10 miles east, one of the few decent outfits around here." Prudence hesitated, studying Hunter Quinn's face for any sign of deception. She found none, only a directness that was somehow comforting amid the day's cruelty. "Why would you help me?" she asked quietly. His expression softened. "Because no one should be judged solely by appearances. I learned that lesson the hard way." He offered his hand to help her down. "You have my word you'll be safe, respected, and free to leave whenever you choose." Prudence glanced around at the crowd, at the faces that had moments ago been bidding on her like she was nothing more than property. Then she looked back at Hunter Quinn, with his steady gaze and extended hand representing the only shred of dignity she'd been offered since arriving in Redemption Creek. She placed her hand in his and stepped down from the auction block. "Auction's over," announced the sheriff, dispersing the disappointed onlookers. As the crowd thinned, Hunter led Prudence and his horse toward the general store. "You'll need supplies," he said simply, "and perhaps a moment to breathe before we ride to the ranch." For the first time since arriving in Texas, Prudence felt something besides fear and humiliation. It wasn't quite hope yet, but it was a start. The general store was mercifully empty except for the proprietor, a thin man with spectacles who nodded at Hunter. "Mr. Quinn, good to see you. Mr. Benson." Hunter turned to Prudence. "Miss Vallens needs the essentials, whatever a lady requires." Prudence found her voice again. "I can't accept charity, Mr. Quinn." "It's an advance on your wages," he countered smoothly. "I pay my housekeeper fairly." Mr. Benson's wife emerged from the back room, assessing the situation quickly. "Come with me, dear," she said kindly. "We'll get you sorted." While Mrs. Benson helped Prudence select necessities, Hunter handled the arrangements for delivery of additional household items to the ranch. Prudence heard him requesting proper bedroom furniture, linens, and various comforts she hadn't expected. "Your husband is very considerate," Mrs. Benson whispered as they selected fabric for new dresses. "He's not," Prudence began, then stopped. Explaining would mean revealing the humiliation of the auction block. "Yes, he is," she said instead. An hour later they rode out of town, Prudence seated side saddle in front of Hunter on his stallion, her few possessions secured behind them. She sat rigidly, trying to maintain as much distance as possible between their bodies despite the intimate position. "It's a fair distance," Hunter said, his voice close to her ear. "You can relax. I won't bite." "This is highly improper," she replied stiffly. She felt rather than heard his chuckle. "More proper than that auction block. Besides, out here, practicality often outweighs propriety." They rode in silence for a while, the rhythmic motion of the horse eventually lulling Prudence into a less tense state. The landscape opened before them, rolling hills covered in sparse grass, dotted with mesquite trees and cacti. Despite everything, she found herself marveling at the wild beauty. "It's different from Boston," Hunter observed. "How did you know I'm from Boston?" "Your accent, faint, but it's there." Prudence nodded, surprised by his perception. "Everything's different here, including the people," he said. "Some worse, some better. Don't judge us all by today." "Why did you really help me, Mr. Quinn?" she asked, unable to contain her curiosity any longer. He was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. "5 years ago, I was in a spot not too different from yours," he finally said. "Someone offered me a chance when I needed it most. I'm just passing that along." Before she could press for details, The landscape opened to reveal a valley with a sprawling ranch house nestled against a backdrop of hills. A barn, corral, and several outbuildings formed a neat compound, with cattle grazing in the distance. "Welcome to the Double Q," Hunter said as they approached. An older man with weathered features emerged from the barn, raising a hand in greeting. "About time you showed up. Started to think you'd forgotten about." He stopped short at the sight of Prudence. "Jasper, this is Miss Prudence Vallens, our new housekeeper," Hunter said as he dismounted, then reached up to help Prudence down. "Miss Vallens, this is Jasper Cole, my foreman and the closest thing to family I've got." Jasper removed his hat, revealing a bald head ringed with gray hair. "Madam," he said, eyeing her with undisguised curiosity, "didn't know we were hiring." "It was a sudden decision," Hunter replied. "Miss Vallens needs somewhere to stay, and we need someone to bring some order to that disaster we call a house." Jasper's weathered face cracked into a smile. "Can't argue with that. Eliza will be pleased to have another woman around." "Eliza," Prudence asked, "my wife," Jasper explained. "Cooks for the ranch hands. Been saying this place needs a woman's touch beyond the kitchen." Relief flooded through Prudence. There was another woman here. The situation felt incrementally less improper. Hunter guided Prudence toward the main house, a substantial two-story structure built of sturdy timber with a wide porch wrapping around the front. "It's not fancy," he said, "but it's solid. My father built it 20 years ago with the idea that it would house generations of Quinns." "It's lovely," Prudence said honestly, admiring the craftsmanship. Inside, the house was indeed in need of attention, not filthy, but distinctly bachelor-kept, with books and papers scattered across surfaces, boots left in walkways, and a general sense of functional chaos rather than home. "Your room will be upstairs," Hunter said, leading the way. "Mine's down the hall, and there are 3 other bedrooms, all empty at present." He showed her to a spacious room with windows overlooking the eastern pastures. A simple bed, dresser, and washstand were the only furnishings, but the space was clean. "It's not much," Hunter acknowledged, "but Mr. Benson will deliver proper furnishings tomorrow. Jasper and I will bring up water for washing, and Eliza can help you with anything else you need." Prudence turned to face him. "Mr. Quinn, I appreciate your kindness, but I must understand the terms of this arrangement clearly." His blue eyes held her steadily. "You're my housekeeper, Miss Vallens. Nothing more. You'll be paid $15 a month with room and board included. Your duties include keeping the house in order, mending as needed, and occasionally helping Eliza with cooking when we have extra hands during roundup. In return, you have a safe place to stay until you decide what you want for your future. And if that future doesn't include staying here, then I'll ensure you have the means to pursue it elsewhere," he said simply. "All I ask is that you give the ranch a fair chance before deciding." After he left, Prudence sat on the edge of the bed, overwhelmed by the day's events. From the highest hopes to the deepest humiliation to this unexpected sanctuary, all in less than 12 hours. She touched her scarred cheek, wondering what Hunter Quinn truly saw when he looked at her, and why he'd extended such kindness to a stranger. The following weeks settled into a rhythm that surprised Prudence with its comfort. She threw herself into transforming the Quinn house from a functional shelter into a home. Hunter had been generous with funds for whatever she deemed necessary, from curtains that softened the harsh Texas sunlight to proper table settings that replaced the mismatched collection the men had been using. Eliza Cole proved to be a blessing, a no-nonsense woman in her 50s who'd lived on the frontier for decades and had a story for every situation. She took Prudence under her wing, teaching her the realities of ranch life while respecting her privacy about her past. Men like Hunter don't come along often, Eliza said one afternoon as they preserved peaches from the small orchard behind the house. Most would have ridden right past that auction block, even the decent ones. Too much trouble to get involved. Prudence concentrated on slicing the fruit. He's been very kind. Eliza shot her a knowing look. I've known that boy since he was 16 and showed up here looking for work. Never seen him take such an interest in making someone comfortable. He actually asked Jasper about what sorts of things a lady might want in a house. Jasper near fell off his horse laughing. Heat crept up Prudence's neck. I'm his housekeeper, nothing more. MMHMM was Eliza's only response, a smile playing at her lips. That evening, as Prudence set the dining table for Hunter's supper, she found herself paying extra attention to the details, positioning his favorite biscuits nearest his plate, making sure the coffee was exactly as he preferred it. She'd learned his habits quickly, finding satisfaction in providing comforts he never asked for but always appreciated with a quiet "Thank you, Miss Vallens." He entered just as she finished, removing his hat and hanging it on the peg by the door. A routine now familiar after 23 days at the Double Q. Something smells wonderful, he said, washing his hands in the basin she'd prepared. Eliza taught me to make her venison stew. Prudence brought the pot to the table. She says you've always been partial to it. Hunter smiled, one of those rare, full smiles that transformed his serious face. She's right. I'd eat it every day if she'd make it. Then I shall have to learn all your favorites, Prudence said before she could consider how the words might sound. His eyes met hers, and something passed between them, a moment of connection that made her breath catch. Then he looked away, taking his seat at the table. How was your day? He asked as she served him. This, too, had become part of their routine, sharing the events of their days over evening meals. Initially, the conversations had been stilted and polite, but gradually they'd evolved into genuine exchanges that often stretched long after the food was gone. I finally finished organizing the study, she said. You have quite the library, Mr. Quinn. My father's collection, he explained. He believed education was crucial, even out here. Taught me himself since we were too far from any school. He sounds like a remarkable man. Hunter nodded, his expression softening with memory. He was. Built this ranch from nothing after coming west with just a wagon and a dream. My mother died when I was born, so it was just the two of us until. He trailed off, then cleared his throat. Until it wasn't. Prudence recognized the boundaries of grief and didn't press. Instead, she shared her own day's achievements, describing how she'd repurposed old curtains into cushion covers for the wooden chairs. The house has never been so welcoming, Hunter said, glancing around the dining room that now featured polished surfaces, arranged wildflowers, and small touches that marked Prudence's presence. You've brought life back to it. His words warmed her more than they should have. It's a fine house. It deserves to be treated as such. After dinner, they settled into another routine, sharing the evening in the sitting room, Hunter with his ledgers or a book, Prudence with her mending or embroidery. The comfortable silence between them spoke of growing ease in each other's company. Miss Vallens, Hunter said suddenly, setting aside his accounts, would you read aloud? My eyes are tired from squinting at numbers all day. Surprised by the request, Prudence selected a volume of Dickens from the bookshelf. As she read, she occasionally glanced up to find Hunter watching her, his expression unreadable in the lamplight. When she finally closed the book, the mantel clock showed it was past 10 later than their usual retiring time. I've kept you up, she apologized. I didn't notice the hour, he admitted, standing. You read beautifully. My father was a professor before. She touched her scarred cheek unconsciously. Before the fire, he read to us every evening. It was the first time she'd mentioned the tragedy, and Hunter's eyes softened with understanding. "The fire that took your parents," Prudence nodded. "4 years ago. I was trying to save my mother's portrait and a beam fell. The doctors said I was fortunate it wasn't worse." Hunter moved closer, his eyes on her scar. "May I?" he asked, his hand half raised, heart pounding. She nodded again. His fingers were gentle as they traced the path of the scar from her temple to her jaw. "It doesn't diminish you," he said softly. "It only shows your courage." Tears pricked at her eyes. No one had ever suggested her scar represented anything but misfortune or ugliness. Hunter stepped back, seeming to realize the intimacy of the moment. "Good night, Miss Vallens," he said, his voice rougher than usual. "Good night, Mr. Quinn," she whispered as he left the room. That night, Prudence lay awake long after the house had gone silent, replaying the feel of Hunter's fingers against her cheek, wondering if the connection she felt with him was merely gratitude or something deeper, more dangerous to her heart. The weeks turned into months, and summer yielded to autumn. The rhythms of ranch life became Prudence's own. She rose with the sun, prepared Hunter's breakfast while he tended to early chores, maintained the house during the day, and shared evenings with him that grew increasingly personal as their reserve melted away. She learned that Hunter had lost his father to rustlers 5 years earlier, that he'd tracked the men responsible and brought them to justice, and that the scar through his eyebrow was a reminder of that confrontation. She discovered his preference for poetry over novels, his talent for sketching landscapes, and his surprising gentleness with the orphaned fawn Jasper had found and brought to the barn. In turn, she shared more of her own past her childhood in Boston, her parents' devotion to education despite limited means, her work as a seamstress after their deaths, and eventually, the desperation that had led her to answer Theodore Blackwell's advertisement for a bride. "I'll never understand how a man could reject someone like you over a scar," Hunter said one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the hills in gold and crimson. Prudence smiled ruefully. In his letters, he spoke of wanting children, a legacy. "Perhaps he feared I would pass on my imperfection." Hunter's expression darkened. "There's nothing imperfect about you, Prudence." It was the first time he'd used her given name, and it hung in the air between them, intimate and charged with unspoken feeling. Before either could acknowledge the shift, hoofbeats approached, and Jasper rode up with news that cattle had broken through the north fence. Hunter was gone within minutes, leaving Prudence to ponder what might have happened if they hadn't been interrupted. The following day brought unexpected visitors: Theodore Blackwell himself, accompanied by the sheriff, and a young woman who couldn't have been more than 18, pretty in a conventional way with unblemished skin and blonde curls. Prudence answered the door, freezing at the sight of the man who had humiliated her months earlier. "Miss Vallens," Sheriff Tanner greeted her, hat in hand. "Is Quinn around?" "Mr. Quinn is checking the herd," she replied, her voice steadier than she felt. "He should return shortly." "May I ask the nature of your visit?" Blackwell stepped forward, his handsome face arranged in what he clearly thought was a conciliatory expression. "I've come to apologize for our misunderstanding, Miss Vallens. I behaved poorly upon your arrival." "Misunderstanding?" Prudence echoed, disbelieving. "Yes, well." He gestured to the young woman beside him. "This is Miss Clara Winters. We were married last month. She was actually my intended all along, but there was confusion with the mail order company. I'd written to cancel my advertisement after meeting Clara, but apparently they sent you anyway." The girl smiled nervously. "We felt terrible when we learned what happened. Theodore insisted we come make amends." Prudence looked between them, processing this new information. You're saying you never intended to marry me. That I traveled 2,000 miles due to a clerical error, precisely, Blackwell said, looking relieved. So you see, it wasn't personal. I'm prepared to compensate you for the inconvenience. Before Prudence could respond, hoofbeats announced Hunter's arrival. He dismounted quickly, assessing the situation with a glance. Quinn, the sheriff acknowledged. Blackwell here wanted to clear up a matter with Miss Vallens. Hunter moved to stand beside Prudence, his presence solid and reassuring. Does Miss Vallens wish to hear what he has to say? I've already explained about the mix-up, Blackwell said. I've offered compensation. Hunter's jaw tightened. The kind of compensation you offered at that auction block. Blackwell had the grace to look ashamed. That was regrettable. I panicked. Panicked. Hunter's voice was dangerously quiet. You humiliated an innocent woman and left her stranded with no resources rather than simply explaining the situation like a man. Hunter, Prudence said softly, touching his arm. It's all right. He looked down at her, his eyes fierce with protective anger. It's not all right. None of what happened to you that day was all right. She held his gaze. No, but it led me here, to the double Q. To you, she didn't say, but something in his expression shifted, suggesting he heard it anyway. Turning back to Blackwell, Prudence straightened her shoulders. No compensation is necessary, Mr. Blackwell. I wish you and your bride happiness. That's it, Blackwell looked surprised. You're not upset, Prudence considered the question honestly. I was devastated that day, but now. She glanced at Hunter. Now I'm exactly where I'm meant to be. After the visitors departed, Prudence and Hunter remained on the porch, the air between them charged with unspoken feelings. Did you mean that? Hunter finally asked. About being where you're meant to be, Prudence turned to face him fully. Yes. These months at the Double Q have been the happiest of my life. As my housekeeper. There was vulnerability in his question. She gathered her courage. Is that all I am to you, Hunter? Your housekeeper. He moved closer, one hand coming up to cup her scarred cheek. You know it's not, he said roughly. You must know what you've come to mean to me. Tell me, she whispered. You're the heart of this place now, my heart. His thumb traced her scar with reverence. I wake each morning grateful to find you in my home, and I go to sleep each night wishing you were closer than down the hall. Joy blossomed in Prudence's chest. I feel the same. I didn't rescue you that day, Hunter said, his voice low and earnest. You've been rescuing me, bit by bit, ever since you arrived, bringing light back into a house that's been dark too long. Prudence reached up, covering his hand with hers. We rescued each other then. His kiss was gentle at first, tentative as though he feared she might change her mind. But when she responded, sliding her arms around his neck, he deepened the kiss with a hunger that matched her own awakening desire. When they finally parted, both breathless, Hunter rested his forehead against hers. Marry me, Prudence. Not because you need a home or protection, but because we belong together. Yes, she answered without hesitation. Yes. Their wedding took place 2 weeks later on the Double Q-Tic's front porch with Jasper and Eliza as witnesses and the sheriff officiating. Prudence wore a dress of pale blue silk, ordered special from San Antonio, and Hunter looked handsome in a new suit, his usually tousled hair slicked neatly for the occasion. As they exchanged vows against a backdrop of autumn-painted hills, Prudence marveled at the journey that had brought her here from the humiliation of the auction block to the joy of becoming Hunter Quinn's wife. The scar that had once defined her in others' eyes now seemed insignificant, just one part of the woman Hunter loved completely. That evening, as twilight settled over the ranch, Hunter led his bride to their bedroom, now their shared room, transformed with feminine touches while retaining his masculine furnishings, a perfect blend of their lives together. "Are you happy, Mrs. Quinn?" he asked, drawing her into his arms. Prudence smiled up at her husband, no longer hiding her scarred cheek. "Happier than I ever imagined possible. Even though your mail-order marriage didn't work out," he teased gently, "especially because it didn't." She reached up to trace the scar through his eyebrow. "Some marks lead us exactly where we're meant to be." As winter settled over the double Q, bringing crackling fires and cozy evenings, Prudence found herself falling more deeply in love with Hunter and the life they were building together. The house that had once felt merely functional now radiated warmth and life. Ranch hands remarked on the change in their boss, how he smiled more readily, how his stern demeanor had softened. Spring brought new calves to the herd, and the news that the Quinn family would grow by one more before winter returned. Hunter's joy at learning he would be a father transformed him further, his protective nature now extending to ensuring Prudence rested properly and ate well while still respecting her independence. On a perfect autumn day, exactly 1 year after their wedding, Prudence gave birth to a daughter they named Elizabeth Hope Quinn. The baby had her father's striking blue eyes and, to Prudence's quiet amusement, a small birthmark on her left cheek, not a scar, but a mark that somehow made her even more beautiful. "She's perfect," Hunter whispered, cradling his daughter with hands that had mastered gentleness despite years of ranch work. "Yes, she is," Prudence agreed, watching her husband and child with a heart so full it seemed impossible to contain such happiness. Later, as Hunter sat beside her on the bed, baby Elizabeth sleeping between them, he traced Prudence's scar with now familiar tenderness. "You ever think about how close we came to missing each other? If I'd arrived in town just an hour later that day, I believe we would have found each other somehow," Prudence said with conviction. "Some souls are meant to connect." Hunter leaned over their daughter to kiss his wife. "Thank God I was only a little late, not too late." As twilight painted the double Q in shades of purple and gold, the Quinn family, once just a lonely man in an empty house, settled into the peace they'd created together. Proof that sometimes the journey to love takes unexpected turns, but leads exactly where it should.